What's up, everyone? Well, today we're back at it with some little teeny junipers, and I've got a little army of junipers here that I'm going to pull from to show you guys some of the work that I'm doing in what is the third, kind of the end of the third growing season for these guys. All right, well, let's start with this one. I would highly encourage you to go back and watch / listen to the video where I potted this into this container. The shari that I created in that video, and that runs from basically the base right here up around here and then continuing around again, has healed over a little bit. So there's been a little bit of a rollover from the actively growing portion of the tree, but it hasn't actually completely covered it anywhere up in here. Although right down here at the base, it is starting to cover it a little bit. So I might come in and do a little bit more shari work right now. But in the meantime, what I've done is I've gone through and actually wired a couple of the branches that I didn't wire in that video. And so this branch has been wired, and then this branch, which was kind of just sticking up here, I actually cut off to encourage these two tiny little buds here to start, so I have a much shorter, tighter bit of foliage to work with in that position. I actually think that the front of the tree is now like here, so you get some nice twists and everything, and the front kind of coming towards you rather than going away from you. I've put additional wire on this, but I also left this runner, and as you can see, it's kind of bushing. It's not really running like they do when they're in larger containers like these guys that I have here. So even though it's escape rooting out into the flat, it's still growing more slowly than it would in a larger container and just sort of left to its own devices. But that's okay, because really I'm on my way to making this into a bonsai rather than keeping it in development. And so ultimately what I'll do most likely is just remove this runner, and that's going to cause all of these tips that are in here to, you know, get a little bit more vigorous, and I'm going to start getting something that looks more like branching and branch pads, which is already kind of starting with this guy. So for today, I'm not really going to do anything to this. I just wanted to show it to you guys. And it will most likely, I'm planning on selling a batch of these guys probably at the Pacific Bonsai Expo in November. So if you're interested in picking up one, I encourage you to come to the show. All right, so here we are in late August of the third year. So these cuttings would have been struck in September of 2019, and as I'm looking at them right now, it is August of 2022, so they're approaching 3 calendar years in age from the time that the cutting was taken. All right, so with this example, which has obviously been pre-wired, the interesting thing that happens here sometimes is that the portion that you wired ends up being laid over, and that means that other parts get stronger. So this would have been where the wire ended, somewhere in here, and these two shoots, or rather 4, have taken off and gotten a lot stronger. So you can see that there's some interesting movement in here, but this section is a lot smaller than the trunk section here, and that's because all these other 4 vigorous shoots that are up here at the top are contributing to this wood creation, but they are not on this section. So this might end up being a branch, but this is one of those things that you have to take into account as you're developing bonsai, is that the plant sometimes is going to take off and grow vigorously from a part of the tree that you actually hadn't planned on using. So maybe when I wired this, that these guys were really short and just like little bushy growth like that, and then they took off and got stronger because they're now in the dominant position at the top of the plant. So this one doesn't have any shari that I added to it, and as long as I continue to treat this way, this trunk will continue to enlarge and be completely round essentially. And by adding shari, you start the process of creating a less round composition, but you also kind of make the core of that composition, you're creating the size of the core of the composition. So if you're going for a larger piece of wood and you don't want part of it to be sort of like a thin ribbon shape in the center, then you need to wait to strip bark. So I'm going to continue waiting on this particular one. I kind of, you know, just do them in batches. Sometimes I strip bark on an entire flat on one side. Other times I will leave the entire flat and just do additional wiring. So with this one, I'm just going to do some additional wiring and then go ahead and put it back in the container. All right, so 2 wires going out 4 separate branches. I've bent this one down, which was kind of the largest one, and put a little bit of a twist in it. Can continue doing that now that the first time I bent it, I was just kind of getting it out of the way so I could more easily wire the rest of the shoots. Cut off one smaller shoot and then concentrate on these guys. So here's a smaller shoot that's coming out sort of towards the center. And let me just finish bending all of these and then we can talk about it a little bit more. Ta-da! Kind of a chaotic looking result for now. So, but just putting movement into all of this growth and sort of spreading it out, bringing some of it down so that it's not shading out the stuff in here that might ultimately end up being your crown. I'm leaving as much of this short growth as I can. Some of these might take off and turn into new shoots, or the new shoots might just come up from up here. So, but the point here is just to continue creating movement in the wood and giving yourself lots of options. And so that's pretty much all I've done just by bending these guys down. I'm not gonna wire this one. I could just to lay it out, but this is going to give these guys more sun, these little things in the center here, but I'm not really sacrificing anything by cutting off pieces of wood or whips that are going to be contributing to the creation of most of the wood in the trunk. So these strong tips will continue to run, and those are all going to kind of combine to create more wood in this part of the composition. As soon as I start cutting off these tips, you're essentially going to really slow down the wood production, and that means that you're moving from the early development phase into middle development or beyond, because you're no longer worried about the trunk, the size and shape of the trunk and the primary branches, and you're just looking to create a little silhouette. So that's it for today on this one, and I'm going to do another example. I should mention, and you'll notice that with some of these guys, when I take them out of the containers and I put them back in, it's a lot easier to kind of work with them if the junction of the roots at this stage is up closer to the rim of the container. So I'm adding soil underneath when I put it back in, and I am adding some soil on top, and then just sort of making sure that it is nestled down in there. Because there's a slight, on this particular type of container, there's a slight angle here. I have to add extra soil around the sides when I raise up the root ball. All right, next victim for today is this guy, and this one is a good example of one that has had a little bit of shari work done. I'm just going to snip off these roots that are hanging around here near the top to get them out of the way. And so you can see right here that there has been, that's the result of my previous shari work. So there's a little bit of, I turn to the side here, there's a little bit of a kind of roundish nature to these callus pieces, and then they're going to continue to create wood. That can make some really interesting shapes, and as you can see, it kind of follows the trunk up here and then stops right there. So in order to really get this going into something that's going to be a super interesting shape in the future, what I'm now going to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to strip bark on the opposite side, leaving two separate lifelines at the base of the trunk. And what that's going to do is it's going to channel all the wood into those two separate things. So instead of making a round profile, I'm making more of a flat, ribbony kind of profile. Now, in order to do that, I need to be really careful that I don't damage the, that I don't completely destroy either side of this lifeline. So I'm going to start on the back here in the center at the bottom, and I'm going to strip bark up, because the way that I stripped bark the first time is following the twists that I created when I initially wired this plant. So let's take a look here. All right, so I've stripped it here, and actually this portion right here on this side is a little bit thinner than I would have wanted, but I think it'll be all right. And if it isn't, then I'll just have a lifeline on one side. But I'm not going to strip it all the way up here like I did on this side, because I'm running into these large branches and I don't want to take those off yet. What I want to do is I want to put a wire on here, and I'm hoping that these guys are going to help build taper in this lower section and accentuate that sort of ribbony kind of distortion that I've created by creating two separate lifelines. So let's go ahead and stick a wire on here. Just like the other one, I've got this potted up, but this time I haven't bent the branches in advance of putting it back in the container. So I'm just gonna, the important thing here isn't the exact bends or style that you create. It's really just to create more options and movement in the growth. So anytime you have something that looks completely straight in a juniper composition, or probably any bonsai for that matter, you're going to have something that you contemplate taking off. So as we continue through our early development of these plants, we need to basically continue creating movement, even if that all of these branches end up in the end either being cut off or turned into gin. If they're turned into gin, then they'll have nice movement to them. If they're cut off, then we've only wasted a piece of wire and a couple of minutes worth of our time. So it looks like I could either wire some of these guys, they're not particularly large, or I can just leave them like this for now and plan on wiring them again in next spring or summer or something like that. I'm gonna go ahead and stick one more wire on here. Okay, so you can kind of see what I've done here is basically just take all of those whips and spread them out, add movement to them, but not have them going straight up. Because this composition is going to be a small composition, I'm trying to build more taper into the trunk here by adding essentially sacrifice branches moving out to the side rather than at the top. And then this foliage that's in here that's been short up to this point will in the next year start to take off and make more shoots. And I can also, if I choose, cut back some of those shoots in order to encourage it to bush in this area if that's the size composition that I want. So if I spin this around, you can see that there's a lot of kind of wacky interest in there, and it doesn't really look at all like a bonsai right now, but that is the next step, and it's really an interesting use of this material at the end of year 3 of its creation. All right, thanks everyone for watching. I hope that helped you move your junipers along, and if you want to share some tips and tricks about the juniper work that you're doing on young trees, put it in the comments below. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.